The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
True crime is everywhere.
Yep, and next weekend, CrimeCon UK takes place in London. And joining us now to tell us more about that event and the true crime phenomena is former detective Stephen. How do you pronounce your surname?
Keogh.
Sorry, Stephen.
That's all right.
I should have checked you before.
No worries.
And Nancy, and again, Nancy, what's your surname?
Bourne.
Thank you. I'm showing my ignorance there, but thank you both for joining us. So, Stephen, you're a former top cop. Hope you don't mind me describing you as that. At CrimeCon and other events like that, do you get into sort of the semantics of the investigations and, you know, how... For example, how I was watching something the other night where somebody was unfortunately murdered, but you saw the crime scene investigators trying to work out from which side the person was attacked from. Did the knife come from the left-hand side or the right-hand side? Is it all that kind of stuff?
So for me, everything I've done since I've left the police is about sharing that knowledge of investigations, because if you watch TV, they get it wrong a lot. So what we try and do, I'm not the only police officer there, there's experts, so forensic scientists, psychologists, all from that investigative world, just trying to get across, well, actually, this is how it's really done. This is what we do, not what you're going to see on telly. And I think that's really important. So for me personally, coming along to CrimeCon, I just look at the list of people that are there, honestly, and I'm proud to be associated with them. There are some fascinating people there. People who've really fought for justice for their children. People who are campaigning for victims, for survivors. So it's an event that when you look at the name, you might think, oh, they're just going to sit there talking about serial killers and what they got up to. Couldn't be further from the truth. It's really about what goes on, how it impacts the victims, how the investigations are carried out. It's educational as much as anything.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor, filling in for Camilla today. I'll be speaking to the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, about Labour's first budget and his plans for the National Health Service. I'll also be joined live from Brisbane, Australia, by former Australian High Commissioner to the UK, George Brandis, to discuss the King and Queen's visit down under. I'll be joined by the former Brexit Secretary and Tory grandee, Sir David Davis, on a key weekend in the Tory leadership battle. Up-and-coming Labour MP for Makerfield, Josh Simons, will be here too, as well as former Defence Secretary and, of course, my GB News host, co-host and colleague, Michael Portillo. He'll be here to discuss defence and China. We've got 90 minutes of punchy politics ahead. Don't go anywhere. Now, to go through the papers this morning, I'm delighted to be joined by my old friend and former Brexit Party MEP, Patrick O'Flynn. Patrick, great to have you here. What's on your smorgasbord of newspapers here?
Well, as you mentioned, it's a key weekend in the Tory leadership battle because the ballot papers dropped exactly almost on the day of your GB News special.
On Thursday night, Friday morning. And
most people think Robert Jenrick is behind and he needed to win that debate, and he performed very well, but I think the common consensus is Kemi Badenoch had the edge, so he still needs to sort of catch up, and in a couple of days from now, most Tory members will certainly have voted. So this is almost like the last set, or certainly the last set of Sunday newspapers, which might sway the Tory grassroots.
We should say that the result is out on the 2nd of November.
Yes.
But because lots of members vote immediately, don't they?
Yes, they've been following the race. They kind of know where they are.
It's all over by Wednesday, maybe.
Yes, so this morning's Sunday papers in that regard are key. And if you look at a couple of them straight off, we've got the Sunday Express, blame Keir for winter OAP deaths, and the Express Group has been campaigning very hard against the withdrawal of the pensioner winter fuel allowance. And who should crop up sort of making this accusation and saying we should blame Keir Starmer but Robert Jenrick? It's quite a hard-hitting idea that the PM would be personally responsible for excess winter deaths among elderly people. And then if we move to the Sunday Telegraph, we have on page 1 of the Sunday Telegraph, and if you're a Tory leadership campaigner, this is the absolute
where you want to be.
Bumper slot, which is page 1, and you have Jenrick again. I will tear up the Unconservative Climate Change Act. He's also throwing out, undertakings to amend the Human Rights Act, the Equalities Act, all the sort of what he sees as the Blairite legal architecture. So he's on page 1 of 2 national newspapers. Yes. So people are saying it's Robert Generic as the jibe that I think you raised with him, actually, on Thursday. But I would say today it's Robert Energetic. That, whatever, he is the underdog, he is behind, but, he's throwing the kitchen sink at trying to close the gap.
In a way which his opponent isn't. I mean, Kemi Badenoch is all about principles, themes, vibes, if you like, rather than some actual ideas and policies.
Yeah, I mean, she is in 1 or 2 of the papers as well, but she's not sort of troubling the front pages, if we can put it like that. And I think her team thought that she did very well on Thursday in the second slot, and for some reason Robert Jenrick decided to go first and perhaps become the warm-up man. And because they're perceived to be ahead, theirs is more now the Ming Vase strategy, i.e. don't drop it, so they're not taking it as many risks. But there's a very good column today by Dan Hodges in the Mail on Sunday about Robert Jenrick, and he is sort of riffing on this idea of Robert Jenrick, like who is the real Robert Jenrick, and he sort of implies that Robert is run either by John Hayes, a very influential senior Conservative backbencher, right-wing intellectual, or some young spin doctors that he's recruited from Suella Braverman, and even at one point suggesting, as Rumpel of the Baileys say, she who must be obeyed might be running the campaign. Now, this is...
We don't know if that's true, do we?
No, absolutely not.
After naming spouses and wives is always not a very nice place to go to.
Absolutely, and I think, whatever you think of Robert Jenrick, he's running his own campaign. He knows his ideas. But it's quite interesting that an elegant dagger in the ribs there from Dan Hodges, so he's not having it all his own way.
Is it right? This is the idea that Robert Jenrick is setting out what I will do if I become leader, whereas Kemi Badenoch is saying, let's develop an idea with the rest of the party. She wants to bring the party with her, whereas Jenrick's saying, I'm here, come to me, to the party.
Yes, absolutely. And I think Kemi has a strong point when she's saying, look, we've got 121 MPs. We're not going to be in power for at least the next 4 years. I'm an engineer. I like building things from first principles. I'll build a bridge that will bear the load rather than just put something together in a hurry and then it crumples under conditions. That will be attractive to some Tory members. Others on the more hard right of the party, I think, a lot of Robert Jenrick's ideas seem to be cast-offs, or not cast-offs, but to be taken from Nigel Farage and Reform. And incidentally, Nigel and Reform are also mentioned on page 2 of the Mail on Sunday in respect of what might be the first key tussle between the new Conservative operation under a new leader against Reform, and that will be if Rishi Sunak indeed does stand down in the constituency of Richmond in North Yorkshire. There's also rumours that Sir Oliver Dowden might stand down in Hertsmere, 2 pretty safe Tory seats.
Neither confirmed by the MPs.
No.
So we don't know this, but it's a speculation in Westminster.
But Nigel's getting his retaliation in first, briefing the Mail on Sunday, or his operations briefing the Mail on Sunday, that he has 2 former Tory MPs lined up as potential candidates, and even claimed that he's talking to a current Tory MP who may stand down and prompt a by-election. Now, the latter I'd be surprised about. The former, that there's ex-Tory MPs who are attracted to the reform bandwagon. I can easily see that. So perhaps this is Nigel throwing out a deterrent to the Tories.
Yes.
I somehow doubt the new leader will want to go for an early by-election until they've established an opinion poll.
Yes, because these are voluntary, so it might be the new leader says to... again, Sunak and Dowden are not saying it's going to happen, but were a conversation to happen with those two, with the new leader, they might say, just pause, let me get bedded in, because I don't think any leader wants a test in those 2 seats. Well, the majority is 12,000 and 7,000, aren't they?
Something like that. So by the standards of this set of Tory MPs, they're big majorities, but they're quite losable if the moment is wrong. So I would think that the new Tory leader will say, look, if you really want to go, you'll just have to hang on and wait till I say the moment's right.
But events come at you quite quickly in politics.
Absolutely.
And there might be a death, sadly, in Parliament. We don't know about that. Might be a suspension. We don't know that. So these are, and again, no confirmation, and I'm sure it's denied by Sunak and Dowden. This might happen, but we'll wait and see.
Absolutely. And reform is now nudging 20%. In the opinion polls. A year ago, almost exactly, there were 2 parliamentary by-elections in mid-Bedfordshire and in Tamworth, and as I recall, they got 3.7% vote share in mid-Bedfordshire and 5.4% just saved their deposit in Tamworth. So what a long way they've come in a year.
Because of one person?
Well,
you know him very well as a former
I'd say
Brexit
2
party.
people. Certainly Nigel Farage and his star quality and his sort of stellar level of political communication. But I think you'd have to say Rishi Sunak accidentally did them quite a lot of favours.
Yes. So moving on, that's not the only election we're talking about in newspapers, is it, Patrick?
No, there's an even bigger election going on, would you believe it, than the Conservative leadership election. Something called the President of the United States. Early next month, and there's a big read-through in the Sunday Times with Donald Trump telling his coalition of voters, don't blow it. He thinks he's now on a winner. The betting markets in America now have, I'd say they rate him a sort of 55% chance to Kamala Harris, 45% chance. And this has very much changed. When Biden dropped out and Harris dropped in, there was a huge liberal media consensus.
A sugar rush of support.
Absolutely,
for her.
that she was on her way. You might remember Meryl Streep calling her in a televised thing the president of the United States, and Harris sort of smiled and said, oh no, 47 days, as in I will be in 47 days. It looks now like it's starting to slide for her, and I think it's because she's sort of coming out doing interviews and
it's not going
saying
well.
what she thinks. I think perhaps a campaigner on the Harris team has said, go out and be yourself, which is the worst possible advice.
So, and just quickly through the other stories in the papers today, the tabloids are in a rare agreement, Patrick.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The 2 leading red tops, the Sun on Sunday and the Sunday Mirror, have both got exactly the same splash, which in Sunday newspaper terms happens very rarely, but it's the heartbreaking sort of follow-up to the death of Liam Payne, the pop star.
And just for listeners, what the headline say?
Both have got the same picture and the same headline, which is from his sister saying, I'm sorry I couldn't save you. Now, both these operations are run by real good pros. They know their market, and for a sort of group of people probably now in their late 20s, the death of this young man is almost like a Princess Diana moment. And they are both convinced, and I'm sure they're right, that a huge swathe of their readers are very, very engaged in this story.
Absolutely, and the same picture too of on the front page for those who can't see it. It's Liam Payne and his sister Ruth on her wedding day in 2022, and look how happy he looks there. More sadness too in the Sunday Times today.
Yes, absolutely. I think possibly a more kind of a bigger emotional wrench from our sort of generation. Sir Chris Hoy, the multi-Olympic gold medalist cyclist, has revealed he has terminal cancer and the prognosis of 2 to 4 years left to live. And you know, he's only in his 40s. His wife has also, he reveals, got an aggressive form of multiple sclerosis. They have 2 young children. And yet one can't help but be moved. There's a front page story in the Sunday Times, but there's also a long read, an interview in their magazine, with, again, the courageous, upbeat, lack of self-pity he's demonstrating. And I have to say, not only is he really one of a handful of the most remarkable athletes this country has produced this century. But he was also a brilliant commentator on the Olympic coverage as well. His knowledge, his way of communicating, and he's approaching, this greatest challenge of his life with typical courage, and what an amazing human being.
I mean, he's definitely worth a read, I would say.
Yes.
In Sunday Times magazine, Decca Aikenhead, who does these interviews very, very well, interviewed him. Now, just finally, to end on a cheerier note, Patrick.
Cheerier note, yeah. If you're going out for a lunch soon, viewers, perhaps a Sunday lunch to celebrate someone's birthday, you may well toast them increasingly with English sparkling wine. And the Sunday Telegraph has got a lovely story about the daughter of Michel Roux Jr., whose restaurant is serving English sparkling wine rather than champagne.
Yes, they did a blind taste test, didn't they? And they found
that's right. And most of the punters preferred English sparkling wine.
Is this climate change, Patrick? Well, better grapes?
Apparently so. It's you're not allowed to mention benefits of climate change, but apparently it is. And English sparkling wine is not cheap because they don't grow the volume, so it has to go for quality and is achieving exceptional results.
Does everyone like English sparkling wine? Are there any people you know who don't like it?
No, actually, I think everyone.
Jacob Rees-Mogg?
Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg once told me after a Brexit debate in which the better accessibility of New World wines was something I tried to on as a selling point of Brexit. He told me afterwards that yes, it was a good point, but personally he only drinks French wine. So you have to check with him.
Why am I not surprised by that? Well, thank you, Patrick O'Flynn.
Pleasure.
Great to have you on Doing Papers today on Camilla Tominey's show. Up next, Health Secretary Wes Streeting will be coming to us live. Stay tuned.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Well, drinkers have been warned about a drop in the quality of French wines after poor weather conditions hit this year's grape harvest. Winemakers across France will make 240 million fewer bottles of wine this year, the country's farming ministry said on Tuesday. So should we think of switching from French to English? I'm joined now by sommelier and founder of Inflorescence Wines, Jacinta Madison-Williams. Hello, Jacinta.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. First of all, let's just think about the poor French.
We should.
Has this been a fairly universal weather catastrophe for France?
It has. Kind of across the board, we're about 22% down on last year's crops, which is quite significant. I think it's like one of the 4 years over the last century that have been this low. So. And
it's affected both quality and quantity?
I would say more so quantity. There's always ways of counteracting quality. It depends if people are desperate to make wine. They can obviously push out more watered down grapes. There's been a lot of rain, if you hadn't noticed. Not only in France, we felt it here too. But lots of frost, supercell hailstorms have completely wiped out some crops. So in some cases, there's nothing to make. In other cases, it's just really watered down grapes and you want to pick earlier to make sure you're avoiding all those rains. But I would say more so it's quantity. But saying that, France is still the biggest producer of wine in the world. It might be taken over by Spain this year, but as a consumer, don't panic. We're not going to run out of wine. And we obviously have lots of lovely wine growing here now in England. So whether we do make a little jump for a bit to English wine, but there's definitely still lots out there.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News. You're watching the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor. Now, still with me in the studio here is Patrick O'Flynn. Patrick, we're about to hear from Wes Streeting on the channel. The big effort here is to try and get money spent better. You're seeing it both on the issue of welfare fraud, but also on spending money better on the NHS. And basically, every government has failed at this, haven't they, since, well, going back before I was in short trousers.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this Labour government has had such a terrible start. I could name you 10 disasters and probably not a single policy success, that they really need to get Wes Streeting and NHS reform up as a talking point. I think if there's one area that the average British voter might think Labour had an edge on, it would be NHS reform.
Yeah. OK, thank you, Patrick O'Flynn. Wes Streeting, I think you're there now. Welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show and GB News. Thank you for coming on. You want a national conversation about the NHS, so let's have one right now. Why is it that spending can go up by 2.8% a year in the NHS between 2015, 16, 2022, 2023, but the outcomes get worse? Why is it that the numbers of operations performed by surgeons falls between 2019 and 2023? Why is it we tip more money into this leaky bucket and it's not getting any better for our viewers and listeners?
That is exactly the right question. And what's happened is we've seen more money and more staff poured in, but without the reform. And I think the lesson of the last Labour government that delivered the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction in history is that it's investment plus reform that delivers results. And that's why a big focus of me, the Chancellor, is about how we make sure that alongside any investment that goes in, we improve the productivity of the system. There will be a big focus in the budget around the investment in things like capital and tech so that we can make the system more efficient. But even where we're doing things like the 40,000 more appointments every week, that will also be achieved through reformed ways of working so we get more bang for the buck, because you know, people are feeling the pinch in their pockets at the moment, and right across the public sector we've got pressures. So we can't just keep on pouring more money in without reform. That would be a waste of money we don't have and a waste of time that we don't have as well.
Well, why do you think you can do better than other ministers? I mean, let's put the Tory government to one side, but Gordon Brown increased NHS spending by 7% in real terms in 2001. Most people think that money went into the pockets of staff, not into actual outcomes for taxpayers who pay for the service. Why are you different to all of your predecessors?
Well, hang on a second. I mean, as I said, the last Labour government did deliver the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction. And actually, I want to take issue with Patrick. I caught what he said there. We've been in for 3 months. In that time, we've ended the junior doctors' strikes. We've introduced a ban on junk food targeted at kids. We've employed 1,000 more GPs onto the NHS front line. In the coming days, we'll be sending crack teams of clinicians into hospitals, not just with high waiting lists, but high numbers of people off work, off sick. And also, you know, just last week at the International Investment Summit, where we agreed £63 billion worth of deals with the private sector, some of that money was also earmarked for life sciences and groundbreaking treatments to tackle obesity. So I'm not pretending we've fixed it all in a few months. Of course, we're not going to do that, and I can't fix 14 years of problems in one budget. But we have hit the ground running. We're getting on with the job, and of course, the best is yet to come.
But why did Professor Sir John Bell, a former Oxford University Regius professor, saying he thinks the NHS is not underfunded, to be honest? Well, you're not getting the best out of the money you're getting. I mean, why is he saying that?
Well, I think John's got a fair point in that, you know, if you look at the Darzi investigation we commissioned into the state of the NHS, Ara Darzi pointed out that we've actually had more staff going into our hospitals, for example, but productivity has fallen. Now, that's partly because we've not given staff the tools to do the job, and you talk to people in the NHS, and when I say things like, look, we're going to improve life sciences and medical technology, the staff say, that's brilliant, but I'd be just grateful if I could go into work and turn a machine on in the morning and it works reliably, or if I don't have to input 7 passwords to deal with one patient. So we've got to get the basics right. It's also about making sure the money goes to the right places. And, for example, pouring more and more money into our hospitals isn't going to fix the crisis. I think putting more money into neighbourhood health services, primary care, that would make a difference, because if someone can't get a GP appointment that costs 40 quid, for example, they can end up in A&E, which costs 400. So you can see how that would be worse for patients in terms of their convenience and getting to the right place at the right time. Also worse for the taxpayer. And that's why I am focused relentlessly on reform and making sure the NHS works more efficiently, more effectively. And it's been interesting since the general election. Obviously, the Conservative Party won't admit their mistakes, but I've had support from the Liberal Democrats, and I've had support from Nigel Farage and the Reform Party on some of the things we've been saying about NHS reform. So I think we are building a new national consensus here, and I think that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, well, but everyone hopes that you can improve services, but the record so far hasn't shown up by previous governments. But moving on to where the money's coming from, the budget, October 30th, you did say in your manifesto you weren't going to increase national insurance or the basic hire or additional rate of income tax or VAT. So why are you looking at increasing national insurance, and why are you looking at increasing income tax by freezing thresholds?
So I'll just say two things. Firstly, I genuinely don't know what decisions the Chancellor has made or is making about tax, because she doesn't share those until much closer to the budget. And I'm not going to speculate, because I value my kneecaps, and the Chancellor won't tolerate me going around speculating about her budget. But all I would say, just on this point about national insurance, we were very clear in our manifesto: no increases in income tax, national insurance or VAT on working people. And we will keep those promises. And I remember us getting criticised before the general election, with people saying, well, why aren't you making bigger promises? Why aren't you going to spend more on X, Y or Z? We were deliberately cautious because we knew that the public finances are in a state. In fact, they're even worse than we expected. But therefore, we wanted to make sure that the promises we made were promises we could keep and the country can afford. And despite the challenges we've walked into, I can tell you we will honour every single one of those manifesto commitments.
But it's widely agreed that the Tories lost power because they lost trust with the electorate. Aren't you risking that very trust that you won the election with by increasing taxes for working people? You are doing that, aren't you, by increasing employers' NICs and carrying on the freeze with the thresholds in income tax?
Well, we were criticised by the Tories before the election because we didn't rule out explicitly those things. But I just say to people watching, like, we don't take your trust lightly. And we know how low the opinion of politics and politicians in this country is at the moment, and that includes us. I think it really is a plague on all your houses as far as the public are concerned, and that is why we are determined to earn your trust through what we actually deliver. And I just say to people, especially as we are making some choices that are unpopular, the last thing you want, surely, is more government by gimmick, more short-term sticking plasters, and the false hope of broken promises. That's not what we're going to do. And we are working hell for leather to make sure that when this government's time comes to an end, that we leave this country in a better place than we found it. That is something that Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives couldn't say after 14 years of Conservative government. We are determined to do better. We have an enormous challenge on our hands. We can't fix all of those problems in one budget, but we are focused on fixing the foundations, getting the basics right, and not just rebuilding our economy and rebuilding our public services, but rebuilding trust in politics as a force for good.
And just finally, Wes Streeting, back to your department, you like to tell us you're not the fun police, you're not the nanny state, and you have once said the NHS can't pick up the tab for unhealthy lifestyles. But should the NHS be funding Ozempic, this miracle anti-obesity drug? Why not get people to eat less and move more and save us all money?
So, I'd say two things. Firstly, these weight loss jabs aren't a panacea. Like, we can't just jab our way to a healthy living. And in fact, I think, we're watching the evidence really closely. We're about to start a trial. It was one of the things we announced at the International Investment Summit last week. But I think the emerging evidence is that jabs alone won't work. You've got to do the jabs plus changes to diet and exercise. So where people are able to access the treatment, the right to access the treatment will come with the responsibility to do the right thing. We don't want a dependency culture in this country.
Thank you to Wes Streeting. Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us today on Camilla Tominey. Coming up, I'll be joined by the former Australian Attorney General George Brandis to discuss the King and Queen's visit down under, and Tory bigwig Sir David Davis. He's here too. This is the Camilla Tominey Show.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win a whopping £36,000 cash in the Great British Giveaway. That's like having £3,000 each month for an entire year. Extra cash in your bank account that you can do whatever you like with. Make sure you don't miss out. Get your entry in now. Just one entry could make you the winner. For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB08 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close 5 p.m. this Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
National Trust Director General has said something rather curious. She's admitted that 70% of the charity's staff are Union Jack-hating progressive activists. Yes, this was speaking at a Labour Party fringe event. The boss of the charity, Hilary McGrady, acknowledged that there was a gap between her staff's views and the views held by the wider public. So was she being honest? Joining me now to discuss this is historian and broadcaster Rafe Hadelman-Koo, who I believe is with me. Rafe, thank you very much indeed. Can this be true?
The founders of the National Trust and later figures involved in it, like my hero James Lees-Milne, were really motivated by love of nation. But I think that love of nation in the Trust has become actively, national self-loathing. And that's really the state of modern Britain. And with the Trust, I mean, what we've done is we've actually entrusted our national heritage to those people who actually actively despise our national heritage. And it's, it's utter madness.
Have these people wanted to take over charities like the National Trust for their political ends, or is it just something that happens? Is it just the type of people who work in charities?
This has been part of the long march through the institutions, that people need to understand that Britain is now a post-revolutionary society. So the buildings that house our institutions look the same, but the people who now run them bear no comparison to the generations who lovingly built and ran them. They are cuckoos in the nest, and we need to understand that. And of course, once you realize that, of course, that explains completely why, the National Trust and others have crudely tried to denigrate our national heroes and link them and their houses to colonialism and slavery, as they ludicrously tried to do.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor, covering for Camilla today. So much more to come in the next hour. I'll be joined here in the studio by Sir David Davis, the Tory grandee, and down the line from Australia by former Australian High Commissioner to the UK, George Brandis, about the royal visit there. But first, here's the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Christopher, thank you very much and good morning. The top stories. Well, the Health Secretary will promise to turn the NHS into a neighbourhood health service as he launches a major consultation about the institution's next decade. Wes Streeting is set to invite patients and NHS staff to take part in a national conversation to shape the government's 10-year plan for the service next week. The party pledged to build an NHS fit for the future. Announcing the consultation today, Mr Streeting said if we want to save the things we love about the NHS, then we have to change it.
There will be a big focus in the budget around the investment in things like capital and tech so that we can make the system more efficient. But even where we're doing things like the 40,000 more appointments every week, that will also be achieved through reformed ways of working so we get more bang for the buck, because You know, people are feeling the pinch in their pockets at the moment.
Elsewhere, those cheating the benefit system could have their bank accounts raided by the Department for Work and Pensions. Private companies like airlines will also be forced to hand over information under new plans being drawn up by ministers, according to the Sunday Telegraph. The crackdown is set to be launched as part of Rachel Reeves' first budget next month, with the total savings set to be £1.6 billion over the course of the Parliament. Some have criticised the announcement for being too intrusive, but the Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall says it's absurd that the current measures have become so outdated. Official figures show the total cost of fraud to the economy last year was a record £7.3 billion. King Charles and Queen Camilla have joined a church congregation in Sydney for a Sunday service on the first day of engagements during their tour of Australia. It's the King's first visit to Australia since he became monarch in September 2 years ago. It's also the biggest trip the King has made since starting cancer treatment in February. Their 6-day visit to the Commonwealth country will involve celebrating the nation's people, culture and heritage. They were joined by members of St Thomas Anglican Church in northern Sydney for that service today. The royal couple met some well-wishers after a crowd of a couple of hundred people were allowed into the church precinct to speak to them after the service. Now, Sir Chris Hoy, one of Britain's greatest cyclists and Olympians, has announced that he has terminal cancer. The 48-year-old's been given a diagnosis and has 2 to 4 years left to live. Sir Chris told the Sunday Times, as unnatural as it feels, this is nature. He also told the newspaper he's known for a year that his cancer is terminal. In February, as he was undergoing treatment, including chemotherapy, Sir Chris said he felt forced to reveal his cancer diagnosis publicly. He's the third most decorated British Olympian of all time, with 6 career golds and 1 silver medal. And a memorial event is planned to take place in London's Hyde Park today for One Direction star Liam Payne, who tragically died at the age of 31. Fans have been encouraged to bring letters, drawings and flowers to Hyde Park following his death just days ago. Zayn Malik has announced last night that he'll reschedule his US tour after the heartbreaking death. Liam's sister also paid tribute to her late brother. Liam's father visited the Casa Sur Hotel in Argentina yesterday, where his son died. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in an hour.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Christopher Hope. Lots more still to come. In just a minute, I'll be joined by the former Australian High Commissioner to the UK, George Brandis, to discuss the royal visit there by the King and the Queen. I'll then be joined by Sir David Davis, the Tory grandee, to discuss the Conservative leadership campaign. He's backing Kemi Badenoch, by the way, and much, much more. And after that, up-and-coming Labour MP Josh Simons. He'll be here. And I'll be speaking to Michael Portillo, the former Defence Secretary and my colleague here at GB News. But first, I'm joined now by the former Australian High Commissioner to the UK and the former Australian Attorney General, George Brandis. George, thank you for joining GB News this morning. It's the evening where you are, I'm sure, in Australia. How is the visit of the King and Queen being received by Australians?
Well, it's been very successful so far. I mean, today has been the first day of engagements by the King and Queen. As you heard on the news bulletin, they attended a church service this morning, and then the King went to the New South Wales Parliament for an extremely important observance, the 200th anniversary of the creation of the New South Wales Legislative Council, which is the first parliamentary chamber in Australia in colonial times. So this marks the 200th anniversary of parliamentary government in Australia. And the King presided at that ceremony. He had attended a lunch, and then this afternoon he's had a number of engagements with dignitaries. But look, the crowds, both outside the church and outside the New South Wales Parliament House, were very enthusiastic, very large crowds, and I'm sure His Majesty is delighted with the reception he's received.
And George, is it right then that the large crowds greeting him, you're seeing on the screen now images from the visit today, earlier today, is it right that that reflects the wider approval of the monarchy? Or, of course, we hear reports in the UK of Republicans. I think the King has said, I'll be the King of your country as long as you want me to be, which is, I guess, all he can say. But how big a problem for the monarchy is the Republican movement?
Well, the first point to make, Christopher, is, of course, that King Charles visits Australia as King of Australia, not as King of England. He is your king, but he's our king as well. And Australians know that. And most Australians are very happy about that. There has been a Republican movement in Australia stretching back to the 1970s, or even a little earlier than that. And about perhaps 25 years ago, when we had a referendum on the subject, it was fairly strong. But I have to say that I've never seen support for the idea of an Australian republic so feeble in my adult lifetime as it is at the moment. There was an opinion poll published about a fortnight ago which showed support for Australia becoming a republic at 33%, support for the status quo at 45%, and the rest undecided. Now, I don't remember a time since these polls first began to be taken in the late 1970s, when support for a republic was as low as 33%. Usually it sits somewhere in the mid-40s. And I think that reflects the fact that the issue, Australians are sick of this issue. We've heard too much about it for so long, and we've really moved on. It's very much, I think, yesterday's issue.
But we see reports in the UK of 5 of the 6 state premiers, in quotes, snubbing the king, not wanting to meet up. And that's interpreted over here as a kind of antipathy or a kind of shrugging the shoulders towards the monarchy. Is that incorrect?
I wouldn't overinterpret it. I mean, these are all but one of them are Labor premiers. The Labor Party is in government in all but one of the states at the moment. And the Labor Party is almost uniformly pro-Republican, and in that respect it doesn't reflect the plurality of opinion in the country at large. The Premier in my state, Queensland, is 6 days away from a state election, so one can perhaps understand why he's rather preoccupied. As for the others, you know, I think it's poor form, but as I say, the Labor Party is a lonely redoubt of republicanism in this country.
It's appropriate then for the modern Australia that there's not an Australian person as head of state. That seems to sit well still with the country.
Well, I think that in a sense misses the point, because we feel that we know King Charles very well. He went to school here when he was a teenager, something that obviously meant a great deal to him, and he often reflects on as a very happy time of his life as a youngster. This is his 17th visit. Australians are so familiar with him. They like him. They regard him as ours. And of course he's an Englishman and he lives mostly in England. But Australians have a sense that he is ours as well, that although not an Australian himself, that he is one of us. And I'm sure that is grounded in the fact that he displays such obvious and enthusiastic affection for Australia and its people.
The King and Queen, of course, George Brandis, head to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa from Australia. Why did the state of Victoria withdraw support for the 2026 Commonwealth Games last year? That's also seen as a kind of, again, an issue with Australia and the monarchy. Is that the wrong way to read it?
That is the wrong way to read it. I mean, that was a catastrophic decision by a disgraceful Labor state government led by a Premier who's no longer in office. It was an embarrassment to Australia. It was a shocking thing to do, but I wouldn't interpret it as other than a particularly poor decision by a very left-wing government which just wasn't interested in this major sporting event. I wouldn't interpret it necessarily as an anti-monarchical decision.
And just finally, George Brandis, how should we judge the success of this visit? I mean, the crowd's turning out, looks great. It's obviously the weather's much better than in the UK. It looks fantastic images from down under. How should we judge the success for ours and your King and Queen?
Well, I think the most practical way to judge is to look at the crowds, and I'm sure particularly when their Majesties take their walk around the Sydney Opera House, as they will do later in the program, for instance, or when they go to the Australian War Memorial tomorrow, you'll see very enthusiastic crowds because, as I said, there is deep and abiding affection in Australia for King Charles. There is, people are well aware of how much this country means to him, and that affection is reciprocated.
Well, look, thanks again live from Brisbane, George Brandis, the former UK High Commissioner to the Australian High Commissioner to the UK. Thank you for joining us. In just one moment, I'll be speaking to one of the longest-serving Tory MPs in Parliament, Sir David Davis, about the Tory leadership race, the upcoming budget, and as ever with David Davis, much, much more than that. Don't go anywhere. This is the Camilla.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're joined by Lewis Oakley and Esther Stanhope. And Lewis, let's start with free gear Keir, shall we? It's been the story of the week, and apparently it's led to, well, calamity in the polls.
Yeah, so he has dropped by 26 points in the opinion polls. And, I mean, it's just been sort of going down from day one. He didn't even start that high. But, yeah, this is just bad optics. As we say, like, he hasn't done anything illegal or wrong. Everything was declared. But at the same time, you're telling people they don't get their winter fuel allowance and you're there walking off with your swag bag. It's just not a good look. And even, you know, I was thinking as well, the optics of them trying to clamp down on MPs having second jobs. You know, any of those could turn around and say, well, actually, we have to pay for our own clothes. I just think it's just bad optics that he's had. And, you know, we've got those comparisons of Sunak in the stands. He's just sat amongst the people. And
Prince William goes to Villa games, albeit in the director's box, but it's not an 8k per game seat. And by the way, can I just mention, this isn't just an isolated Labour incident. Since the start of their tenure, they were accused of filling the civil service with previous Labour donors, previous Labour aides, people who worked for Labour Together think tank. The civil service is meant to be politically neutral, and they bypassed a lot of procedures to get people into their positions, not least the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who parachuted Ian Caulfield, his name was, who donated £5,000 personally to her, and then he ended up in the Treasury with a 175k a year job. Yes, he did resign after it was revealed in the Times, but it does make you wonder, you know, you've spent years having a go at the Tories for this, and you do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it's full of hypocrisy, and also the whole Sue Gray thing, and they were slagging off the Conservatives for not towing the line, and now they're being hypocrites because now they're taking freebies.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm now joined by Sir David Davis, the Conservative MP for Goole and Pocklington, former Brexit Secretary, one of the longest-serving MPs in Parliament,
etc.,
etc., etc. You're backing Kemi Badenoch.
Yep.
in this contest. Members vote this weekend. I think it's almost all over by midweek. I think
that's probably right. I mean, I was speaking last night in York, and a significant number of those people had actually already voted. I mean, they wanted to hear my views, but they'd already voted, and I think this weekend will be the biggest peak, I think.
And they saw the event that I hosted for GB News on Thursday.
A very large number had. You know, normally you wouldn't expect most of the audience to have seen it, but they had. And I mean, they were clear. They thought Kemi had won easily. As frankly, your audience, because you chaired it, and by the way, it was brilliant chairing. I mean, you know, it's quite difficult to get that right. And the audience in the studio were 4-5 to 1 on Kemi's side, and the next day in the Telegraph, it was 78-22. So you know, it's looking. I mean, it's looking good for her, I think.
Why are people in the audience there, maybe people in the Telegraph and other members anecdotally in York, warming to Kemi Badenoch? I mean, she's quite prickly by reputation.
Well, by reputation, yes, but in person, she's charming. I mean, as the audience will see, you don't need to believe me. Watch that, watch the replay, as it were, of the other night. You know,
it's on our screens now. They're watching clips now.
She's got a charisma about her, you know, which you can't make up. You know, you can't school people and give people that charisma. And it comes partly out of her self-confidence, partly out of her determination to defend a cause, you know, which people want. I mean, you know, as they did with Margaret Thatcher, you know, they want somebody. They don't want somebody who's a pussycat. They want
Come off it. You can't always go back to Thatcher. You always think the next person is the next Thatcher, and then it never works out, David Davis.
That's always the claim, I know. And every single would-be Tory leader wants to be seen as another Thatcher, because, you know, she was basically the greatest Prime Minister for the best part of a century. But you know, I'm supporting her. I remember Thatcher. I was a student leader in those days, as was Lord Michael Forsyth, who's also supporting her. The two student leaders who dealt with Thatcher as Education Secretary before she was leader, and then we were both very junior members of her team. You know, we can see the similarities. Look, there are plenty of differences, but today is a time when we're facing similar-sized problems. In those days, it was the Soviet Union, it was the miners, it was out-of-control inflation. Today, it's a war in Europe, it's a national health... You've just had Wes Streeting on. It's a national health service that's proving almost
But Robert Jenner can take on those issues too, can't he?
Well, I'm not so sure. You know, I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I like Robert. He was very fluent on your debate. And he wasn't, he wasn't hopeless. It wasn't a walkover in that sense. But you know, he's trying too many headlines, bluntly. I mean, you know, what we did in the 70s, and it wasn't just Thatcher, it was all the people around her, was we worked out our principles, and then we spent 4 years finding solutions to those really impossible problems. And that's what we've got to do now.
I mean, we talked earlier with Patrick O'Flynn. He's doing everything he can to win votes, isn't he? Tearing up the unconservative Climate Change Act, axing the Equality Act, Human Rights Act, replacing them with a Great Reform Act. He's throwing everything at the wall, but it's not sticking in your world.
No, it's not. And so some of it's coming apart almost straight away. I mean, the stuff on ECHR, I mean, even The Spectator has been saying, look, you know, the Rwanda policy wasn't turned down just because of that. The court made clear that there were British statutes. There was the UN torture treaty. There was a UN refugee treaty. We're going to withdraw from everything. And even that thing, which was unwise, I thought, he did on the SAS in Afghanistan, was rebutted by 3 SAS officers.
During the party conference.
Yeah, 3 SAS officers within 2 or 3 days. So, you know, the trick with this is to know what you're trying to do, but not try to sort of make up a headline straight away. Take your time. I mean, Kemi's an engineer and a lawyer by training, and you know that means she's analytical, she's clinical about this. You see it in her previous work. I mean, you see it in the international trade, where she got the biggest trade treaty post-Brexit, the Pacific one, but also not just that. She was business secretary for the postmasters, and before the docudrama, before everybody knew about it, she'd already stepped in and given them a £600,000 guaranteed payment before the docudrama.
So she saw it coming. She didn't do very well on removing retained EU law, did she? 600, I think.
Well, you say that.
But she says it was more like 2,000, but nowhere near the 6,000 which Jacob Rees-Mogg set out.
Well, and with great disrespect to Jacob, I was the Brexit secretary before that, and I was a leaver before Jacob was an MP. So, and I know exactly what she was trying to do. She was taking away the worst ones and leaving in place others which we've got to replace. You can't just throw the law away. You've got to replace it with something. And I'm afraid my ERG colleagues were just going, oh, sweep it all away, without thinking through.
Do you worry she's not the finished article in terms of politics? The confusion she got into about maternity pay. She's trying to attack regulation on small businesses during a party conference. She said that maternity pay is a bit overbearing on some companies. Then she had to do tweets and then a video, then a clip explaining what she meant. Some of your colleagues were forced to defend it. I mean...
You're going to tell me off for mentioning Thatcher again, but, you know, that was exactly the same with the young Thatcher. You know, Margaret Thatcher, milk snatcher, remember all that?
Yes,
you know,
that was when she was a minister in education
when she was a
under
minister,
Heath.
You know, and you know, the point about this is that we're not in power today. You know, if we're clever about this, we will be in power in 4 years. If you'd asked me the day after the general election, I'd have said we're out for 10 years. You know, those numbers look terrible, but it's a mile wide and an inch deep, this majority, and they have had the worst start to the Labour, have had the worst start to government of any government in my lifetime, you know, which is quite long now. Not quite since Gladstone, but, you know, and so we are in with a real chance if we solve the real problems with real answers.
For me, it starts at the budget. That's when the movie starts. We're in the trailers at the moment. I think we're in the prologue towards the narrative.
It's going to be a horror movie, I'm afraid.
Well, it's going to be quite difficult for many, but others might think it's good to spend money on the NHS and public health service workers.
We spent record amounts of money.
For very bad outcomes from the Tory party.
Exactly. Record increases before the pandemic, and the actual output went down.
But why? But that's because of you, but bad management by the Tory party. Wes Streeting thinks he can get better outcomes through
Wes
tech
Streeting
and
has just done a deal with doctors, lots of money and no payback, no change of procedure.
Yeah.
If you want to actually improve the NHS, it's going to take some change of approach. That means the doctors have to change the way they attack things and deal with things. Well, that should have been in that pay deal, wasn't there?
Just back to your candidate, Camilla Tominey. I mean, she helped to bring down Boris Johnson, who won the mandate in 2019. I know you said in the House of Commons, in the name of God, go, and you an early opponent.
I was probably the first, so, you know.
OK, but put that to one side. She was not very loyal, was she, when she was a minister for Johnson? And Boris Johnson, had you guys stuck with him, he may have done better than Rishi Sunak in the election.
No, I'm afraid not. I mean, look, why did we decide we wanted rid of Boris? Because he'd broken his promises, he'd imposed laws.
Camilla wasn't loyal. Camilla Badenoch was not loyal to Boris Johnson. That's the key point.
There were 50 ministers who dropped out of that government. 50. You're going to accuse all of them of some sort of fatal crime? No, they recognised that Boris was no longer a good Prime Minister, no longer an asset to the Tory
What did she mean when she said that civil servants, should be jailed? She's jailed and the like.
She's making a point. One of the things that's happened since I've been in government, I mean, bear in mind, on and off, I've been in government since the 90s, is that the civil service has got worse and worse at its job. It's got worse and worse at taking orders.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, you're going to kick me. When Thatcher was in power, lots of civil servants didn't agree with what she stood for, but they did what they were told.
But she said 5 or 10% of civil servants are very bad, should be in prison bad. I mean, that's ridiculous.
The truth is 5 or 10% are very bad. And as she also
said... Not criminal bad, though, come on.
As she said as well, she said 10% are really brilliant. And that's also true. And what we've got to do, she keeps talking about rewiring the state. And rewiring the state doesn't mean locking them all up. It means actually redesigning the way we do things. She's an engineer.
And there's time for that.
And there's time for that, exactly.
But it's principles, it's vibes, it's saying trust me when trust was a thing that you lost back in the election.
Trust me. I mean, I started out by telling you what she had done before.
Yeah.
That isn't just about trust, that's about performance.
Okay.
And she said to me, she talked to me last week, and she said, what do I think about, if we win, what do I think about who should be in the shadow cabinet? And she said, I want a meritocracy. Her opening words, I want a meritocracy.
What job does she offer you?
I don't want one. And I won't.
Okay.
And I won't be. You hold me to
You heard it here on his show. You don't want a job in the shadow cabinet.
I'll happily help, but I don't want an official title. Okay. But the simple truth is that she wants a meritocracy. The last several prime ministers have not really had the best possible people in their cabinets, and she's determined to have the best possible people. That's really, really important. That again, you're going to kick me again. That's what Thatcher had. That's what Major had. But not
Robert Jenrick resigned over immigration, net migration and illegal. Kevin Badenoch stayed put. He has principles, she doesn't.
Yeah, you think so? I mean, look, he resigned at the very end of the time. During the reshuffle, he resigned. I mean, if you're going to resign, I know about resigning.
You've resigned.
I know.
I've been there watching it.
I know about resigning. You make the point. You make the principle. Not when something else is happening. Off your bat. And
even when it hurts you, actually, to be fair, you resigned over Big Brother state in 2008.
It only works if it hurts you. It only actually works because then people say, he means it, right? That's the point, and that's the distinction.
Good point. Alex Salmond, of course, has passed away, a friend of yours. You became emotional in the Commons this week. What he endured, the apparatus of the state turned against him. People are saying on Twitter, social media, why are people being so nice about this guy, given how he behaved towards some of his staff? He even his defence lawyer said he could be inappropriate, difficult to work with, behaved badly during that case. I know he was cleared of all charges.
Well, that's the point. That's the first thing to remember, right? I mean, the procedure used against him was described by the senior Scottish court as tainted with bias. That's where we start. A government that's why I was quoting his lawyer when I used that phrase about this state, tainted with bias. Then he appears in front of a predominantly female jury and a female judge and is cleared of every single charge. And frankly,
he behaved badly when he had power. That's the point.
Look, lots of enemies will trot out now. Of course they will. I mean, he's an old-fashioned man, and he himself said he's not a saint. He's a 50s man in a way. But the simple truth is, he didn't deserve what was done to him. It was the sort of thing you expect an oppressive state to do, not a British democracy.
And it's time to judge the whole record of the man. Is that your point?
Yes. Well, my point's more than that in a way. I mean, first thing, when you go into public life, if you're decent and you're doing it for the right reasons, you want to change the world, right? Well, Alec changed the world. He's got a devolution settlement for Scotland, which is much stronger than anybody else could possibly have got.
So-called vow unveiled before the referendum.
He scared the life out of the Cameron-Osborne government by his arguments. And we were on... I mean, he was due to have dinner with me the night after he died. And we were planning how to improve the way the Scottish Parliament worked. Yeah. And we would do it. In fact, I'm going to do it, but we would have done it.
Yeah. Just moving on quickly, the handing over of the sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, your government started that. It's your fault too, isn't it?
I don't know what...
Not your fault personally, the Tories' fault.
I don't know what Cleverly was doing there, but what this is almost certainly is the Foreign Office trying to pursue its "be nice to everybody" line. The raw truth is it's a strategic error of the First Order, and it's important because of America. It's important because in the future, those sorts of islands are going to matter.
And just very finally, you're investigating the Lucy Letby trial.
Yeah.
What's the update on that? Was it a miscarriage of justice? Have you met with her yet?
No, I haven't met with her. I mean, I'm not worried about it. And people ask, would I meet with her? I said, yes, if she wants to, but I don't. I'm not going to make a judgment of her innocence or guilt by looking at her and saying, are you guilty? I'm judging on the evidence. I spent 3 months going through the evidence.
And where are you now? Guilty or not guilty?
I think most likely, you can't be certain, but most likely, like 90-odd%, not guilty. The most likely reason is one of two things. Either poor management of the hospital, the Royal College found that, or a superbug, Pseudomonas, an investigation found that, or both together. That's much more likely.
So is it time then to retry Lucy Letby?
Yeah, I don't want to declare her innocent. I want a retrial. Do it properly.
OK, look, Sir David Davis, forgive me, thank you for joining us today on Camilla Tominey's show. If you want to catch up on that debate we held, or I helped to host on Thursday for GB News, Decision Time, the race to lead, it's on our website. Go to gbnews.com/shows to catch up. Now, coming up next, I'll be joined by the Labour MP Josh Simons and former Defence Secretary and GB News colleague Michael Portillo. Stay with us.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. Storm Ashley will bring strong winds and heavy rain to much of the UK today, with amber and yellow weather warnings in force. The area of rain that we can see out there at the moment continues to push its way eastwards through this morning, but it's in western parts of Scotland that we'll see those strongest winds today. Gusts of 70 to 80 miles an hour are possible, but even along Irish Sea coastal regions, we could still see those gusts of 50 to 60 miles an hour. As that rain band pushes its way eastwards, it will turn a little drier across much of England and Wales, and temperatures still above average for the time of year, though definitely feeling cooler than we saw yesterday. As we then go into this evening, we start to see a further area of rain moving in from the northwest as we go through Sunday evening. This affecting parts of Northern Ireland and particularly parts of Scotland, where we could see some heavy downpours over the high ground. Turning a little more showery as we go further east, but those outbreaks of rain do continue across parts of Northern Ireland through the evening, so perhaps leading to some localised flooding in places. For much of England and Wales, though, it will be a mostly dry end to the day on Sunday. Perhaps still a little cloud and rain just lingering in the very far southeast for a time, but that clearing its way eastwards as we go into the early hours of Monday morning. Still remaining very wet and blustery across much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and the winds gradually easing as we go through the early hours of Monday, but still remaining very windy to start the day. It will be quite a mild start to the day on Monday as well. Temperatures generally remaining in the double figures for most places, particularly where that cloud persists overnight, and still remaining very blustery to start on Monday. But those winds will gradually start to ease as we go through the day, though the showers still pushing in from the west, spreading their way eastwards through the morning. A little cloudier across the very far south of England. Got this next area of rain just skirting along the very far southeast coast as we go through the afternoon. So a bit of a damp end to the day here and plenty of showers elsewhere, with temperatures a little closer to average for the time of year, 15 or 16 in the south and around 12 or 13 further north.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark Meets and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Christopher Hope, here on GB News. I'm the GB News' political editor. I'm delighted now to be joined by Labour MP for Makerfield, Josh Simons. Josh, great to see you. Thank you for joining us on GB News. You're an up-and-coming Labour MP. You went to private school. Are you happy that VAT is now being put on the bills for parents at your former school in Cambridge?
I am, yeah. My school was a fantastic school. I was incredibly lucky to have the education that I had. My dad was a working class kid who set up a business, grew that business, sold it, and then was able to pay for my education. And I'm eternally grateful for that. But I think it's the right thing to do for schools like mine, for parents who are sending kids to schools like mine, to be charged VAT on their school fees. It'll raise about £4 billion, and that money will be invested into a state sector that the vast majority of children go to. So I think it's absolutely the right thing to do.
You mentioned your working class father's background there, Josh Simons. Would he have been able to afford a 20% uplift in fees?
Well, he went to a grammar school. He went to a grammar school in Bury, so he didn't go to a private school and wouldn't have been able to afford it at the time. He was able to afford it because he set up a business. He set up a small business. He grew that business. He invested blood, sweat and tears in it. And then he sold that business, fortuitously, just before the financial crisis. And so he was able, therefore, to pay for my education. And yes, he would have been able to afford that VAT on private school fees. And if you ask my dad, who's come from that background and gone on that journey, he's an example of a success story in this country. He absolutely thinks it's the right thing to do to charge parents like him VAT on private school fees.
You don't worry about state schools being overwhelmed by children leaving the private system and going into the state sector?
Far from worrying about it, part of what makes public schools, state schools work is a real diversity of backgrounds that kids come into them from. And we know this in the towns, for example, the towns in the constituency that I represent. With any one of the towns, Orrell, Hindley, Ashton, there's a vast range of people. And we don't want some of those kids being siphoned off into a private school and sort of separated and insulated from the state school and the public education system. So I think actually, if more private school kids come into the state school system, I recognise the strain on resources that will place in the short term. But in the long term, I think that's a very good thing for those schools and for our country.
And just finally on this issue, there's concerns, isn't there, amongst members of the armed forces. They are able to put their children through private schools because they're often away, particularly when they get to secondary school. You want to keep the children in the same place. Should the government step in and support families with children who are in private schools from the armed forces?
Well, this government and I, as an individual MP, would never want to place any additional burden on the shoulders of those who serve us. We need to be doing everything that we can to support them. And that's one reason why this government has made sure that every vet, every former service person will have a home ready for them if they need it and if they're currently lacking it. I don't know about the individual detail of what it would take to solve that problem, but I do think if there is clear evidence that this is a problem for serving families, then it's something the government should look at.
And Josh Simons, you said recently that you think we should all get off Twitter, particularly you and me in our Westminster world, and do something else with our time, or use a different social media network. But there isn't one, is there? Or not one of comparable scale. What's your solution to the issue of the somewhat cesspit parts of Twitter can be like?
Well, I think this is something that we really have to think about in a fundamental way. And we have to get away a little bit, I think, from the slightly ridiculous binary that our debate about this is stuck in, between free speech on the one hand and really draconian regulation where governments are telling platforms, what content they can have up and what content they have to take down. I think what we need is something in between those two things. Newspapers all the time have ethical responsibilities, professional responsibilities that they abide by and that the whole sector abides by. I think what we need is something like that the people who are building these algorithms abide by too. And they say, look, in the end, we all have an interest, both businesses, government, citizens, all have an interest in a public debate that is better and more actually representative of what we're like offline in the online world, and particularly on Twitter. And therefore, we will commit to building algorithms that don't just make people angry, spread hate, spread disinformation, but that actually spread the kind of public debate that we have, in the pub, in a coffee shop, having a cup of tea. That's what we really like, and we need our online world to reflect that.
That's right. Part of the problem is, of course, people say things on Twitter and social media you wouldn't say in person, and that's the problem. Right. Would it be the government setting up a social media network, or these social media companies being forced to change the algorithms by law?
Well, I think they have an interest in this too. I mean, Twitter's become such a basket case that so many of us are leaving it. So I actually think there's a shared interest there, and it may not require the sort of heavy hand of the law coming on and saying, this is how you should regulate it online. I'm sceptical that the thing the government should be worrying about and spending its time on in terms of digital is building a social media tool. So I think it's about sitting down with the engineers, with the CEOs of these companies and saying, look, this isn't in your interest. It's not in the interests of the people represent. So we've got to change it, knowing that if that conversation doesn't make progress, then yes, it's something the government would have to look at in terms of a framework.
And Josh Simons, while the Labour government is getting on with its work and you're supporting that work as Labour MP, the Tory party is trying to find a new leader. How do you weigh up the two candidates? Which one do you fear most?
Well, it's been quite a weird week in the Conservative leadership debate. You know, I stood up in the chamber in the middle of the week, just after Christopher Chope had said that Kemi Badenoch couldn't be leader of the opposition because she was too focused on spending her time with her children, which I thought was bizarre and, you know, a classic example of just being stuck about 30 years out of date. And meanwhile, Kemi Badenoch herself said these very strange things about maternity leave that she doesn't seem to actually believe. And this kind of bizarre, slightly self-referential conversation, I just think is a very long way from the kinds of things that the public are focused on. They're focused on waiting lists, the fact that GPs are not serving towns right across the country. You know, they're focused on the fact that their pay and their pocket is going less far. These are the things that the Conservative Party needs to be talking about if it wants to have any hope of winning the next election. And frankly, I don't think either candidate is really talking about them.
What do you make of Robert Jenrick's plans to tear up what they call the unconservative Climate Change Act, including the Equality Act, Human Rights Act, and replace them with a Great Reform Act?
I think these things are just distractions from people's real priorities. I do think that actually with something to do with the kind of over-judicialisation of our politics. Too often politicians say, well, I had to do this because a lawyer told me to, or I had to do this because an economist told me to. And there is a problem with accountability in politics. You know, I think voters want to hear leaders saying, I chose to do this and here's why, and you can hold me accountable for that choice. What I don't think the answer is just ripping up legislation that's now set through how businesses work, how the private sector operates. I don't think that's the right answer to a problem that I do recognise at all.
You mentioned the real issues people are worried about, and I think the budget almost defines that in one place. Our postbag here at GB News is full of people worried about what's happening on October the 30th. If the Chancellor increases national insurance, that is a manifesto breach, isn't it?
Well, she will not increase national insurance on workers. You know, that's the thing that Labour's leaders said again and again and again through the campaign. What they are focused on is the taxes on working people. And this idea that when businesses pay a tax and when workers pay a tax, national insurance, they're the same thing. They're just not. They're both called national insurance. One is paid by a worker, one is paid by a business. And Rachel Reeves has been very clear that she will not increase the taxes that workers pay.
Do you think it's going to be a difficult Halloween budget for many, though? £40 billion to be raised, cuts in spending, huge increases in taxation. I mean, this is the moment the government gets to work. The narrative is set, surely.
Well, I do think it'll be difficult. You know, this is a budget that will last about a year before a long-term spending review process gets underway. And I think that means this budget's inevitably going to be about doing two things at the same time. One of them is balancing the books. It's filling that 25 billion black hole that this government has been left by the last Conservative government. And that is going to mean difficult choices on welfare, you know, making sure people are getting back into work, for example. But at the same time, I think what you will see the government do, and I think you heard this from the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, earlier, they will also be laying the foundations for growth, for public services that actually work for people, for getting NHS waiting lists down. And that, above all else, is about investment. And I think what you'll see from this budget is both of those two things at the same time. Getting the books balanced so that we are not spending more than we're taking in, and also investing to lay the foundations for the future.
And how should we judge the success of your government, Josh Simons? You've got a PhD in Harvard. You know, you're a pretty clever guy. What should we be looking at? Falling waiting lists, falling debt, maybe even falling taxes by the next election?
Well, I think it would be a wonderful thing if by the time of the next election we are able to cut taxes for working people. You know, not only not raise them, but actually make sure that more of the money working people have stays in their pocket. But one of the things about this government, I think, in terms of what you should judge them for, is they were really clear during the campaign about that. You know, lots of people, especially on the left of my party, said, oh, they're not being ambitious enough, you know, they're not talking about vision enough, they're not making enough promises. And actually what they said time and time again, what the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, the Health Secretary have all said is, we need to be specific and bounded in what we say to the public because trust in politics is so low. And what that means for journalists and for voters and for the wider public across this country is if we fail to do the things we said we are going to do, such as bring down waiting lists, then we fully expect to be judged by that. So that what, therefore, you judge us on is actually very, very simple. It's the first steps that we talked about all the way through the election.
OK. Well, Josh Simon's there, the Labour MP for Makerfield. Thank you for joining us today on Camilla Tominey's show. Thank you. Up next, I'll be joined by Michael Portillo, the former Defence Secretary and my GB News colleague. Back in 3 minutes.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Right, we're having beans this morning.
Beans for breakfast. There's no better breakfast, is there?
I like beans on toast for breakfast.
So do I. I would actually call myself a baked beans connoisseur.
Would you? Well, we can put you to the test. Tell us what the story is.
The story is, you might think beans, you might think Heinz. Heinz means beans.
Beans means Heinz.
Beans means Heinz. Heinz means beans. Who knows? So, of all of the supermarket baked beans, it is actually the Aldi supermarket version, this version over here, which came out on top. The Bramwell's baked beans, 76% on the taste test.
And they're much cheaper as well.
Much cheaper. Households can save, if you're buying 2 cans a week, £100 a year buying the Aldi version of these baked beans. So we thought we're going to do a blind taste test this morning.
Yes.
To see.
So we've got the Aldi beans, we've got M&S beans, and we've got beans Heinz. So I think number 2 is the best one.
Yeah, I agree.
Right,
2 came first best to me.
So the Heinz is number 3.
Interesting.
Which was the worst one?
Which is the worst one, which is the ones, actually, I'll buy it home.
Do you know what? That's just proven it. M&S was number 1. And Aldi was number 2, which was our favourite as well.
I said M&S.
Yeah, and we both said Aldi.
We did say Aldi. I have to be honest, I was not expecting that.
I told you. This is a hill I will die on. These are the beans that I get at home and I love them.
At university, you get the tin that's half that size, and it was 21p for the store ones and 23p for Heinz baked beans. And as I say, the key was in the thickness of the sauce and how hard the beans were. They
actually are really nice. They're really, I am really surprised, and we buy more than 2 cans a week, so it saved me a couple of £100.
We get through 2 cans.
So you like the Aldi ones?
I like the Aldi ones. Okay. I'm shocked.
They're a lot cheaper. Yeah.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm Christopher Hope, filling in today for Camilla. I'm delighted now to be joined by Michael Portillo, former Defence Secretary and GB News host. Michael, thanks for joining the show today.
Good morning.
You, like me, are waiting with bated breath for the budget in 10 days' time. Can you compare it with anything you saw in the 90s when you were at the top table in government? I mean, and what advice would you give to Rachel Reeves?
I don't think it's my job to advise Rachel Reeves. I mean, I think she's pretty well set out her stall already. She's made a claim about there being a great hole that she needs to fill. I mean, in truth, I think she wants to increase public expenditure rather markedly. She's beginning to find now that that means you've got to increase taxes. And she's beginning to discover also that it means you have to increase taxes on working people. Because although it is very appealing to talk about taxing the rich, the number of rich people who are paying very high taxes is quite a small number. If you increase the taxes on them, you will get a little extra yield perhaps, but you also risk that those people will leave the British economy the big money is in the millions of people. And so if you want to spend more money as public expenditure, you have to tax a lot of ordinary people, and you have to do it quite hard. And I think one of the depressing things is one doesn't yet see any sign, not even through Wes Streeting, of reform of public services, of putting some emphasis on getting better value for money from the money that we put into our public services.
No, and maybe, I put it to Wes Streeting earlier, it may be a space where Labour can get some leverage over the NHS. I mean, the Tories have sunk billions more into the NHS over the past 14 years for not really the equal return. Maybe Labour has the permission to get reform that the Conservatives can't do.
There's no sign of that so far. I mean, inasmuch as the pay deals that were done were, of course, unconditional. An opportunity to try to drive higher productivity in the National Health Service was missed at the time that the settlements were made with the National Health Service staff. And in what's been announced today as being the way forward for the National Health Service, I mean, also, I don't see much emphasis on reform, leadership, management, control. Those are the sorts of words that I would want to hear about. I mean, all this stuff about new technology, that's nothing to do with a new government or to do with Labour rather than Conservative. Of course, new technology is coming, and I dare say it will have some beneficial effects. But I think what the National Health Service actually suffers from is that it is very poorly managed, that best practice where it exists is not extended universally across the service, that many of the people who are in management are entirely the wrong people, and that you cannot judge in the National Health Service, this would also apply to defence, by what you spend. You ought to be looking at what the outputs are, and the outputs for the spend are very depressing.
The world's getting more and more dangerous, and of course I do wonder when the government might commit to getting to 3% of GDP spent on defence, and that maybe can't come soon enough, Michael Portillo.
At the moment we're at 2.3%, but even though I was Defence Secretary, you might recall that I was also Chief Secretary to the Treasury, I've never thought that the amount spent was what mattered. It is the, I was making this point a moment ago about the National Health Service, It is the efficacy with which the money is spent. And almost daily in defence we hear some quite depressing stories. I mean, the other day we heard that the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, the ships that back up the warships, are suffering from chronic undermanning, which puts at threat, you know, how we can deploy the carrier force.
Yes.
I was hearing the other day that helicopter pilots are not able to train because there aren't the engineers to maintain the helicopters. And again, you would think that a focus of management would be able to address these problems. And these are serious problems because it potentially means the non-availability of the equipment that you and I and all other taxpayers have paid for.
Yes. Michael Portillo, how do you rate the first, must be 106 days now of this Labour government? What's their biggest misstep? I personally think handing over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius is the biggest error so far.
I think it's been a very rocky start indeed. And you were hearing a moment ago from David Davis, and I think he's typical, that actually it's put quite a lot of optimism into the Conservatives. Conservatives had kind of assumed they'd be out for a long time, but they think these first 100 days have gone so badly that maybe they're in with a chance. What do we mean by that? Well, you know, the whole freebie gate issue has been really depressing, I think, for Labour voters and for Labour backbenchers. I mean, I think many of them must be absolutely seething, and obviously combined with the cut of the winter fuel allowance. And the impression is given by the leadership that it's in politics for itself. That it thinks there are different rules applies to it from the...
Michael, I must quickly ask about your show today. Forgive me for not asking until now. A good one coming up?
I'm not hearing you too well, but if you're asking about my show, which I think you were, it starts very shortly. We'll be talking about the 1300-year struggle between Islam and Christendom. That's because of a new book. I'll be talking to Lord Faulkner about assisted dying. I went to see this week a printed document from the 9th century.
Thank you to my guest today, Michael Portillo. Sounds a great show. Camilla's back next week. But up next, as you heard there, is Michael Portillo.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. Storm Ashley will bring strong winds and heavy rain to much of the UK today, with amber and yellow weather warnings in force. The area of rain that we can see out there at the moment continues to push its way eastwards through this morning, but it's in western parts of Scotland that we'll see those strongest winds today. Gusts of 70 to 80 miles an hour are possible, but even along Irish Sea coastal regions, we could still see those gusts of 50 to 60 miles an hour. As that rain band pushes its way eastwards, it will turn a little drier across much of England and Wales, and temperatures still above average for the time of year, though definitely feeling cooler than we saw yesterday. As we then go into this evening, we start to see a further area of rain moving in from the northwest as we go through Sunday evening. This affecting parts of Northern Ireland and particularly parts of Scotland, where we could see some heavy downpours over the high ground. Turning a little more showery as we go further east, but those outbreaks of rain do continue across parts of Northern Ireland through the evening, so perhaps leading some localised flooding in places. For much of England and Wales, though, it will be a mostly dry end to the day on Sunday. Perhaps still a little cloud and rain just lingering in the very far southeast for a time, but that clearing its way eastwards as we go into the early hours of Monday morning. Still remaining very wet and blustery across much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and the winds gradually easing as we go through the early hours of Monday, but still remaining very windy to start the day. It will be quite a mild start to the day on Monday as well. Temperatures generally remaining in the double figures for most places, particularly where that cloud persists overnight, and still remaining very blustery to start on Monday. But those winds will gradually start to ease as we go through the day, though the showers still pushing in from the west, spreading their way eastwards through the morning. A little cloudier across the very far south of England. Got this next area of rain just skirting along the very far southeast coast as we go through the afternoon. So a bit of a damp end to the day here and plenty of showers elsewhere, with temperatures a little closer to average for the time of year, 15 or 16 in the south and around 12 or 13 further north.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win £36,000 cash in the Great British Giveaway, and you really could be next.
Hi, I'm Angela from Wigan and I won £30,000. Winning the money enabled me to treat my children, which I've not been able to do for a while. And if I can win, anyone can win.
For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB08 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close 5 p.m. this Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop star to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live.